Good evening, everybody. I'm Emily Booth. I'm editor of the Architects Journal, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to our latest 40 Under 40 panel discussion. The AJ 40 Under 40, in association with VitrA, celebrates the UK's most exciting emerging architectural talent. And our huge thanks to VitrA this evening for hosting us in their fabulous new showroom and for making this event possible. So our discussion topic today is what's new in housing. And I'm delighted to be joined this evening by some brilliant members of our 40 Under 40 cohort. We've got Jennifer O'Donnell, co-founder of Glasgow-based architecture studio O'Donnell Brown. We've got Tom Lewith, who's co-founder of creative architecture and design studio TDO, based in Southwark. We've got Chloe Phelps, who's CEO of Grounded, which is a member of Place Capital Group, and she's also formerly head of Common Ground Architecture. And we've got Yẹmi Aládérun, incoming development manager for the Meridian water team, Enfield Council, and public practice associate. So welcome all. Each of our speakers are going to be giving a short presentation about what they do and key projects they're working on. And then we'll have a panel discussion about current housing trends, where the opportunities and challenges are for architects, which is a really current and important topic. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions towards the end of the session. And we should be finishing at around 7:30 p.m. and there'll be time for drinks and networking after that. So in the first instance, I would like to invite Jennifer to begin. Thank you, Jennifer.
Hello. I'm Jennifer O'Donnell. I'm co-founder and director of O'Donnell Brown, and thanks, Emily, for the introduction. We built our practice and projects for London Borough of Tower Hamlets. Through these projects, we developed a specialism in working in tight urban sites within one of the most diverse populations in the country. Sam and I then moved the practice to Glasgow in 2016, and from our self-built studio, we try and test ideas through our teaching initiatives like Experiencing Practice, where we bring students into practice, and our self-initiated projects like the Community Classroom. Here, we partnered with Bernardo's Works, an employment programme for young people, to build a prototype for an outdoor classroom to test how we could improve outdoor learning environments. And this collaborative approach has led on to a number of structures, including the Rainbow Pavilion with Glasgow artist Kate B. Robertson. We are energised by this way of working, and these themes feed into the studio's other projects. And in terms of housing, this currently ranges from, I'm just going to change the slide, the Foundry, which is a 206-unit mid-market rent scheme for Places for People in Glasgow, and on the right, the UK's first Passive House Plus scheme in Norfolk. The regeneration of vacant and derelict land weaves its way through most of these projects and the impact on the communities that it sits within. And I want to now focus on two short case studies. We build lasting relationships as a studio, and our self-initiated work on the classrooms that I showed led directly to the studios working with Bernardo's to develop new housing solutions for young people leaving the care system. Gap Homes North Glasgow is the first of 7 projects with Bernardo's that we're working on, developed from a concept of protection, enclosure, and community. The homes are purpose-built on vacant sites that the local authority have gifted to Bernardo's, like this one in North Glasgow, which enables us access to new locations, and young people are more visible then within the community, and there are added regenerative benefits for the area. The homes themselves are arranged around private, semi-private and public spaces. I'll just click through them just now. And they all have aspect onto a shared outdoor space. I'm just going to click on. If you just give it a minute, it's a little bit sticky. So crucially, these homes form shared outdoor space, and they are around a courtyard. And there's a street edge which provides frontage onto the city and connection with the city. There's a strong client-led desire in these projects to now develop off-site modular model to ultimately reduce the on-site time and deliver this much-needed housing more quickly. And young people have been at the centre of design development, and through listening, asking simple questions, and designing with empathy, we hope to create homes that will provide the best possible start to independent living. The second project I'm going to briefly touch on is the Gov Engraving Docks. The site is 2 miles west of Glasgow city centre, and the dry docks were built in the River Clyde's heyday, and now they're derelict and awaiting restoration, but they remain an evocative part of Glasgow's shipbuilding history. Through proactively making a proposition for an existing client, we were engaged to develop community-led master plan and think about how we can open up this site to the city. The site has a really contentious planning history. Everybody's got a view on it in Glasgow. And so we discussed with our client that rather than starting the conversation with the housing, that we go out into the community, we speak to people and we listen. And this has translated into a master plan which brings culture and heritage to the fore. Highland Lane, an urban pier, tracks a historic route to the river in blue on this image, with workshops for community groups in pink, Dry Dock 1 for restoring historic ships, and on the right-hand side, an urban wetlands. By taking an open partnership approach with the council, locals and our client, this will form the basis of a new neighbourhood, which 300 new homes will help to frame. And short term, they're credible partners who are helping us open up this derelict site to the city, the Gov Wetlands project, the Dandelion initiative, which is about food production. The Gov Engraving Docks is going to be turned into an unexpected garden. And we find that so often there's a disconnect between the people who will benefit from the site and the people who own the site. And we're told here that the community feel like they are being listened to, their voices are being heard, and we're really looking forward to taking these early designs forward in the coming months. And I'll conclude by saying that this is all, of course, now framed as we move towards what I hope is a post-pandemic context. And in this respect, there are 3 themes which run across all of our housing work currently. Homes that are good for our health. Physical, mental health is improved by providing access to good quality, well-designed external space and connections to nature. Homes that are good for the climate. We need to make a positive contribution towards the international ambition of net zero. I should say that Glasgow's targets are among the most ambitious in Europe. We need to exceed building standards, create sustainable neighbourhoods, maximise reuse opportunities. And homes that can be worked from. Homes need to be flexible to meet the challenges experienced during lockdown, that we all experienced during lockdown, such as social isolation, but there are opportunities there in terms of adaptability. A good home is a basic human right and crucial to a person's well-being. So I hope that what I've discussed today in terms of O'Donnell Brown's work, it's given us the opportunities anyway to test new solutions which can hopefully lead to better prospects, and I'm looking forward to taking that discussion forward with the panel this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And so interesting to hear you talk about designing with empathy. I think that's something we can probably discuss when everybody's done their presentations. Lovely presentation, thank you. And next up, Tom. Thank you so much for presenting.
Thanks so much, Emily. I'm Tom Lewis. I'm a co-founder of TDO. We're an architect studio based in Southwark. We've got a focus on residential architecture among other sectors. We've got quite a varied portfolio, and about maybe a quarter of our work is modular. So I was going to talk about that today, and some of the projects that have influenced the lens which we see modular architecture through. So this is actually the first project we ever did. We started the practice on the back of 2 projects: Doll's House, which is this, and Pond House, which we built ourselves. And both were projects where we were trying to figure out what it is about designing buildings together. There's 3 of us who founded the practice, and what architecture meant to us, and how we wanted to design together as one. So what we kind of discovered is simple forms, face finished materials are really important to our work. And we went on to design Old Church Street, which is the first sort of proper building, I suppose. And that was our introduction to off-site construction of prefabricated elements. You can see the sort of patinated brass elements in the elevation were delivered as components. So that was a sort of a new encounter for us as well. So these projects all sort of influenced what we felt architecture means as product, but also as a process. So we went on to explore that through collaboration. So we've done a series of collaborations with different artists and designers in different fields. This one was with Hannah Martin, who's a jewelry designer. And what we find quite interesting about these collaborations is the thought processes that other designers bring to it and what that means for how we design. This one was with James Bridle as an artist, and we were designing a gallery space for him on a rooftop in Peckham. His work explores, or this project explores the idea of surveillance and the questions around ownership of that. And our gallery space we designed for him was repurposed water storage tanks, which used rapidly deployable pre-existing and prefabricated technologies. In our experience on these and other projects we've done in collaboration with other designers, we found that they require compromise, which is something we see as having gone through these projects as an opportunity to explore ideas with each other, and that compromise through collaboration being an opportunity to learn from each other. And we strongly feel that the projects that come out as a result are a lot stronger. So just moving on to modular architectures, which is what I started out talking about, we see that collaboration and exploration as an important departure point when considering modular. And we see modular as being quite important to, or having a very important role in the housing crisis and the climate crisis, and embracing it as an important consideration. It does have a bit of a mixed reputation. It can be considered crude and repetitive, and sometimes it is. But we also see that as a constraint to explore. And we did that on this project in collaboration with manufacturers. This Fab House, which we designed for Urban Splash and Place for People. It was in collaboration with George Clark and the manufacturers involved in the process, which was SIG, a modular manufacturer at the time. And that process was quite a long, year-long research and design exercise to really understand the manufacturing process and the opportunities and constraints that we could explore. And that really allowed us to celebrate modular architecture. So the results for that were or how we explored that. We introduced these corten shrouds, which are entrance shrouds and reveals to the windows, which reference the industrial heritage of the area, and interchangeable if the buildings are built on a different site. We can switch the material out there. The deep reveals on the building lend a sense of weight and permanence to the building, which is often not present in modular. And the precision engineering in manufacturing that you can get out of a factory process allowed for face-finished materials and junctions with millimetre-perfect joints that you can't often achieve at the same budget point from traditional build processes. So there's a lot of things we could explore. We also took off, you can see on the ceilings here, there's a ceiling cassette, because modules come with 2 cassettes. When you stack the modules on top of each other, you don't need the ceiling cassette anymore in the sort of permanent state. It's there sort of like for transit. So we took the ceilings off and got more floor ceiling height, and really got this sort of free detail through the timber structure. So we found lots of things that we could explore and celebrate through modular through that collaborative process with the manufacturers and working with the factory. And then following on from Fab House, we worked on a project called Dovelane with Place for People, who wanted a exemplar modular scheme. So on this one, we again worked with the manufacturers from the outset to understand how they're going to build, how they'd want to be building it, and what the factory process would be. And we brought the steel frame that was going to be built into the structure anyway out to the front of the building to create a primary grid, and then use the modular frame to create a secondary grid. And that process just introduced a sense of depth and layering to the elevations. And then we used colour to delineate the extent of each home, so you can read your flat on the elevation. So it introduced a sense of place and thought and depth to the building. So these are all opportunities that we found through designing with modular. The challenges have been fairly consistently the same, which is that one manufacturer talked to them in the factory was saying modular really is a volume business, which it's a large part is true. So if you're not delivering 1,000 of them, it can be hard to sort of get into or hundreds of them get into a factory queue. There's a need for standardization, which can pull schemes away from having a site-specific response, and there's dimensional constraints on the size of each module. So there's things that are quite difficult to overcome. And so to address these, we've started to explore how we can achieve a balance between, or actually achieve both standardization and customization in modular builds. So on projects we're looking at the moment, we've been achieving this through using a 2-module approach to house types, which can be configured in lots of different ways to make these sort of Tetris shapes. And then the component-driven solutions, the elevations, so the doors, windows, panels are all dimensionally consistent and can be applied to the elevation according to how they want to respond to the site. So the modules going through the factory have the same frame, and the components have the same dimensions, and they can be constructed in a way that's aligned with the factory building process, but also allows for that customization on site. So we feel there are opportunities with modular to really kind of get into the architecture of it and avoid a crude and simplistic outcome. And that really comes through this collaborative process and engaging with manufacturers and other designers in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really, really interesting there, where you talk about the fact that modular is the challenges that are with it, but the creative possibilities there, and really exploring positively those constraints, which makes for such creative outcomes, I think. So thank you so much for that presentation. Chloe, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to try, hopefully the clicker works. Yes. So hi, I'm Chloe Phelps. I've recently set up Grounded, which is a brand new practice. We're a whole month old, and it's building off the legacy of the work that I've set up at Common Ground, or I did set up at Common Ground Architecture and Brick by Brick, where I was head of design with a two-tiered job, I guess. One was head of design for Brick by Brick, where I oversaw the delivery of all of the smaller sites, which I'll come on to in a second, and also ran Common Ground Architecture, which was our in-house architecture practice. Moving over now, I'm part of Place Capital Group, which is a development company that's also been recently established, based in Manchester, predominantly starting to look at work and housing estates in the northwest of the country, really looking to bring life back to a lot of these kind of forgotten estates that have been left to kind of run down and not really be maintained. So some of my work will be based up there, but the majority of it will be based in London and the southeast. I guess what Grounded has got to offer is a unique blend of public and private sector experience. We were practiced in the public sector, understand kind of a sense of stewardship to a place, the people and the planet, that isn't just all driven by money effectively, but also got a lot of experience from the private sector in terms of driving delivery and cost management. For me, social value is at the heart of absolutely everything that we do, involving residents, involving or just thinking about every impact that that housing has on the planet as well. You know, do we absolutely 100% need to build this house in this location? I've already touched on that, but bring a lived experience of development and cost management. And for me, I think one thing I'm going to really focus on in this conversation is about kind of research and development, really, post-occupancy analysis and talking to the people that live in these places. I think as a profession, we're really bad at doing this. We're basically creating these homes for people who are going to live in them. I think very often it's easy to say, you know, it's not in my control, I can't do it, the client doesn't want to pay me to do it. But I think as we, you know, every other industry will put investment into learning more about that. So I think that, and there's an opportunity to talk to people all the way through. So this is my journey some of my journey so far. So this is Croydon, for those of you who don't know it, the borough. All the little black dots on there were sites that we were looking at as part of Brick by Brick. The little balloons that come out are all the projects that Common Ground Architecture designed. In total, I think we had a pipeline of about 2,000 homes. 707, no, that's the whole Brick by Brick business, not Common Ground Architecture, but 771 of them will be realised. And there's an awful lot of mysteries out there about Brick by Brick, and I urge you to read the AJ story on background on that. It's very informative. So, I mean, for me, this was kind of what I've been doing over the course of the last 5 years, is really looking to accelerate housing delivery in a place which was only really delivering 20 homes a year prior to Brick by Brick's establishment, and making a lot out of a little. So all of these sites were infill development. No single home was demolished. It was all about infill developments on some of the hardest sites in London, garage sites, estate infill, you name it. There was contamination all over the place. It wasn't easy, but we managed to make something of it. So this is one site. So Pump House is probably the one that gets kind of bandied around quite a lot as our key project as Common Ground Architecture. But this is Avenue Road, also known as Trellis Mews, which is about to be finished by Brick and CGA. It's on a backland site. It's a typical garage panhandle site in South Norwood. It's got a very long drive that you can see just down at the bottom here. And the key thing really was always carefully balanced in terms of viability all the way through. How do we deliver homes in these locations? Yes, they need to be fantastic. Yes, they need to be delightful. Yes, they need to be joyful places to live, work and play. Sorry, rescue myself there. So the key thing for us was really driving how can we cost effectively make a scheme work in this location. So for us, we managed to come up with a format which was all stacked. It's all incredibly tight in terms of its arrangements, but there's a generosity to it. We managed to achieve a 95% net to gross, which is not something you can achieve very easily with housing. And we achieved that by having 2 stair cores, which is perhaps a little bit counterintuitive on a site like this. But we didn't have a lift, and it kept our corridors down. So you basically come up the stair core, and then you enter in over your balcony, which means that you end up with a slightly oversized balcony, which is quite nice. It's your front garden, effectively. And you have, we've also introduced these planters into them, which were there partly to kind of stop overlooking to neighbours. And this is it on site at the moment. So it's still a little bit messy. It's not a particularly scenic photograph, but I think it does start to demonstrate some of the quality that we're managing to achieve on quite a relatively lower value in terms of London, but still high construction costs on a backland site. And you can start to see some of the planters going in here. And then over on the middle photo is our rear elevation. So we've got quite a lot of brick detailing that we've managed to achieve, which, whilst on a larger scheme, it can end up being quite a lot of money. But on a smaller scheme, it's actually, these little details don't really cost that much in the grand scheme of things because you don't have that many of them. Just making sensible decisions about the form and the type of brick was more important than actually kind of foregoing some of the brick detailing. And then on the top is just kind of a glimpse of standing on one balcony, looking across the stair core to the balcony on the other side. So kind of a bit of a flip, but this is going back to the overall master plan. So one thing that we started doing in the last couple of years of Brick by Brick was bringing in a thing called One Planet Living, which is thinking about sustainability not just from achieving net zero carbon, but thinking about it as a more holistic process. So One Planet Living, if you haven't read up on it or don't know anything about it, I encourage you to do so. It's pioneered by a charity called Bioregional, who are behind BedZ. And it's about creating happy, healthy, viable communities, basically. So it starts with, you have an action plan that's linked to each one of these 10 principles, which I shan't read out, but you can use, and they very deliberately put zero carbon at the end, so you don't spend your whole time in workshops talking about zero carbon and never talking about the rest of it. It's a really useful framework, and what we were trying to do at Brick by Brick was to implement this across the whole portfolio, so, and also the business and its operations and its management of properties. So it was a real holistic process. It wasn't about having a flagship scheme that was passive house or zero carbon. It was, how do we make the whole portfolio work better? How do we all work as a business that's better? And this is one thing I want to take through into Grounded as well. So I won't go through all of these. This is a slide to just say doing housing is really difficult. I mean, most architecture is difficult, but I think housing is just getting more and more difficult, and particularly public sector housing. And I suspect we'll kind of touch on a few of these in our conversation later, but you know, just to pick out a couple of them, it's, you know, PI exclusions in terms of fire exclusions. One thing I'm going through is setting up a new practice at the moment. It's going to be really difficult to think about refurbishing buildings, and you know, that should be the first question before we even start to think, is this the right place for a new home? But my point with this slide was, this is all background stuff. Ultimately, our job is for the client and to get them to talk to the people who are going to be living in these homes, and they're the two people that we really need to be understanding. So for me, it's kind of post-occupancy surveys, talking to people in the engagement process. These are some surveys we started to do at Brick by Brick, which can be a little bit painful to hear the answers to, but if you don't ask the questions, you don't learn. And we tried to focus them so that they weren't just about, you know, can you use your MVHR? We did ask these questions, but it wasn't just about that, you know, how it is, do you understand how everything works? It was, do you have a sense of pride about where you live? Do you know your neighbours? Have you got to kind of, you know, do you feel like you value the sustainable features on your home? And a lot of times they didn't know that they had sustainable features on their home. But it's all of those sorts of conversations, and I think this is one of the most important things we should be doing. If we are going to build, we need to know whether we're building the right thing, because we don't want to be knocking it down in another 20 years' time and saying that was the wrong thing to do, or this building's no longer safe, or, you know, whatever. So I think it's just, yeah, that's the big thing for me. And just one final thing was just saying that if you don't have the opportunity to talk to people after the commission's ended, then I think there's opportunities all the way through. Quite often on public housing projects in particular, you're talking to people in terms of your engagement sessions right up front, through as part of the planning process. Actually, those people should be the communities who are going to be moving into these places. So it's a real opportunity to start to say, what sort of home do you want? And quite often the conversations that we were having were, you know, I want my son or daughter to be able to move into a place nearby, you know, and so you can start to design them so that they're purposefully targeting those people, they can afford them, and all of that sort of stuff. And yeah, so we just need to be talking to people more. That's it.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Really, really interesting points there about the importance of communication with residents and the community, and that focus on post-occupancy analysis, and being open to learning from that. I think there's so much that we can take from that, so thank you. And now, Yẹmi, over to you. Thank you for presenting.
And actually, I think I'll start by saying it's been really lovely to hear from all the panelists, see and hear all the work you're doing. And I think as we're here today, I think we are in good hands when we talk about the future of housing. So I think my presentation is going to be coming from a slightly different angle. So rather than somebody that is designing buildings, more someone that's procuring and responsible for delivering them. So, look, right. So we all know that we need to build. but at quality. And for that, we need money, and people, so human resources. So I'm going to use my 5 minutes to talk about people and money. And I promise for the rest of the conversation, I'll stop saying things in triplicates. But as they say, repetition is the mother of retention. So the issues of needing money and people, human resources, of course, to deliver high quality places and spaces, is of course not new. But we do need new and refreshed solutions to solve the issues we're facing in these areas. So in terms of money, one of the present problems in the provision of housing is that of funding and financing for social housing projects. And due to the relatively low grant rates of government funding, affordable housing is largely funded through profits made from open market sales, so that's outright sale and shared ownership, and debt financing. And there's therefore acute pressure on projects to be financially and commercially viable. To provide some context, since 1974, affordable housing costs paid for by government grant in England has varied between 90%, so 90, before 1990, to more currently below 20%. So in the drive for us to try and claw back some of the deficit in affordable housing provision, we're going to have to think more creatively about how we fund projects, seeming that it's very unlikely that we'll return back to the good old days of funding pre-1990s. So one of the examples that we can do this is via joint ventures and partnerships, but joint venture partnerships that are mutually beneficial to all players and not only those with the deepest pockets. And this would allow small-scale housing associations and local authorities who have high ambitions to develop in their own right to join in the clarion call to build. It's also becoming clearer and clearer that collaborations are going to be needed to be formed between private entities as well as housing providers and housing associations that have experience at building and delivering at the scale that we require, and also doing a good job of delivering the high quality places and spaces we're after. So there are different innovative ways in which one can do JVs. It is possible to partner purely for commercial reasons, and it's also possible to partner in more social ways. So, for example, local authorities with housing associations to unlock other means of funding and grant that might be made available to local authorities, but they might not be able to spend within the given time frames in their own capacity, but could pass on to partner housing associations to develop in that said borough. Good old Mayor Granville here. So based on the work I've been doing over the last few years at Islington and Shoreditch Housing Association and our partnership with Hackney Council, we were challenged to use an innovative multi-million council fund to increase the number of genuinely affordable homes being built in the borough by the Mayor. So another project that I would like to start on is the Meridian water scheme in Enfield. Today is actually my first day as development manager in the Meridian water team via the mighty public practice. So there's still lots of deep diving to be done, but high level figures are that it's a £6 billion 20+ year regeneration project that will create 10,000 homes. 40% of those will be affordable, and it will generate upwards of 6,000 jobs. So it's an absolute mammoth. It's a beast of a project, but it's a really good news scheme. And the project is being developed via a combination of joint venture and direct delivery from the local authority. And VitrA Partnership are the JV partners, and they've negotiated a long-term partnership with Enfield, where VitrA and Enfield will collaborate in the design and delivery of the scheme, enabling Enfield to take ownership of the London affordable rent, housing, employment space, and the public realm. At the same time, social housing has also been identified as a very appealing investment class and has been attracting new investors for its strong ESG, so environmental, social, and governance credentials, and driving creation of new investment approaches from the likes of pension funds who have been showing great interest in the sector, and some have already started investing. So I think the key to continue to be able to bring forward new affordable housing schemes will be our ability to unlock more of these sorts of genuine partnerships I touched on above. Now, people. I mentioned public practice above, and I would just like to spend a little bit of time now talking about people. So I'm one of a number of new associates in the current cohort public practice, and for those that don't know, public practice is a non-for-profit social enterprise with a mission to build the public sector's capacity to improve the quality and equality of everyday places for now and the future. It was founded in 2017 by Pooja Agarwal and Finn Williams. Over the last 5 years or so, council house building has been making a serious comeback, as you know, Chloe, with many authorities creating very ambitious kind of development plans. And the rejuvenated ambitions have been as a result of a combination of access to alternate funding, the government's announcement in 2019 to remove the borrowing cap on the housing revenue account, this really giving councils the freedom to borrow to fund their ambitions, to build at scale for the first time in a generation, and also mayoral support, strengthening of in-house project teams to inject design expertise into local authority planning departments. This internal capacity building is a service that's been sorely needed for a number of years. And again, for some context, in 1979, 49% of qualified architects in the UK worked in the public sector. Following decades of cuts and outsourcing, that figure is now at about 1%. It just hasn't been very sexy for architects to work in the public sector. So public practice have stepped in. And they've really shown to be leaders in the drive to bring about change in public sector capacity. So just a few more slides here talking about the very wide range of roles that there are in public practice. A bit slow. Oh, it doesn't want to move from here.
It's going to go on about 10 slides.
Yeah. There we go. Can skip through that one. Yeah. Again. Okay. And then I think one more. Okay, so final slide. So I'll just end with a call out to anyone that wants to be part of the public practice movement. And I think it definitely is a movement. And as I say, it's all about building people power with wide-ranging skills to assist in improving the quality of public house building. Please do get involved. Applications are now open for placements commencing in April 2022 and an open day on the 9th of November to find out more. So join me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yẹmi. That Meridian water scheme is just giant, isn't it? So loads of exciting stuff going on there. And so illuminating to hear you talk from the procuring perspective and just really so supportive of the public sector as well. Really, really good stuff there. Thank you so much. Such interesting presentations. Let's have a think now. I think the that notion that really comes through from all of you is the idea that Jennifer mentioned of designing with empathy, that idea of connecting with community, with connecting with the residents, the people who are going to be living here, and making sure that they have a happy, healthy home, and the importance of home. I think it would be really interesting just if you could talk about what best practice looks like in that area, in that designing with empathy, really, and thought and connection with community. Chloe, I wonder whether you'd like to sort of talk about that, where empathy figures in in your approach in your world.
I think it's really important just to listen first and foremost. And I think it starts with listening to the client, what they want, what they're trying to achieve, their ambitions. And then I think all the way through, it's just listening. Like part of the slide I was trying to put up there was just kind of our job is to help sail through all of those situations. And I think in terms of one thing I've learned through the process, particularly over the last 5 years, is you just never know what people are going to think about a place until you actually start to have those conversations, which makes them so important. And I think, having also lived on council estates, lived in London, and there's been work happening to them there as well, is you realise kind of people come in and contractors come in, councillors come in, kind of all sorts of people come in with bright new ideas about what they're going to do about the place that you live. But quite often people forget that it's where you live, it's your home. And I think it's really important to think about that, particularly even when you're designing even really kind of early stage consultation process on a seemingly quite small scheme, that listening to what the neighbours think and what they want from that site is really important. And I mean, sometimes it's really difficult to get them to talk to you as well. Like there's certainly been estates that I've worked on where, the issues that the people have that live there are so complicated that they don't want to come and talk to you either. So you've got to be prepared for that situation as well. And at that point, you need to talk to local councillors and really understand more about the place. So I think it's just, you never really know what you're going to come across. And I think the age of the architect being the aloof, all-seeing, kind of godlike figure that comes in and comes up with a grand solution for everybody is kind of gone. I think we're kind of the makers.
Absolutely. And Jennifer, would you like to talk a little bit about that, more to the point of the designing with empathy, and how that really informs your work?
Yeah, I mean, so often we are driven by words like optimizing, maximizing. Well, in the studio we are at the moment on the housing work that we're doing, bigger, all of that stuff. And I don't want to be naive and say that that's not important. Of course it is. It's critical. It's part of the process, but it's just that. It's part of the process. And I think that, touching, Chloe, on what you were saying about stewardship, social value, it's remembering that when we're designing housing, it's where folk are going to be living. It's so important, and it's remembering that we're doing what we're doing because it's about building for people. So I think remembering that architecture is for people is such a basic thing, but something that we come back to every single day in our practice and what we're doing. And the project that I touched on second of all, the Gov Engraving Docks, I mean, that project has been stuck for decades. The first scheme, there were 1,000 homes going to be put in those graving docks. It's this Grade A listed site, and there were going to be silos of car parking and 20-story. It was a different time. It was pre-2007 recession, and I think that's the other thing to say is that so much of what we do is there are forces that are out with our control as architects. But what we were able to do, in terms of coming back to the point about empathy, and putting people at the heart of what we're doing, is conversation, listening, suggesting a different approach and being proactive and saying to our client, look, you have this site that is stuck, and you have this site that is stuck because you're coming from outside of Govan, which is an area of Glasgow with huge deprivation, and saying, I'm going to put housing on the site. Now, 30% of that was affordable housing, but nobody heard that. What they heard there was a planning application that was rejected in 2017. What they heard was there's going to be housing on the site, and it's luxury housing, and it's somebody out with our area coming in. And they're not listening to us. They're coming to consultation events, fait accompli, with a proposal that I can't influence. So we said, just put it to the side. Let us just go out and start speaking to people and making connections and understanding that this process is bigger than one architectural practice. Ego goes to the side. It's bigger than one developer, and it's about collaboration and working together. And I think that that's really important for us too, is just realizing that some of these big regeneration sites, they're, as so often as architects, it's, it's my design and, my vision. And as you were saying as well, it's park that. That's not important or relevant. And so through doing that, we now have positive traction, and there's a fantastic, the wind has changed, and on that site it looks like, the community are behind what's coming forward. And I think the whole point of it is that we don't know what the end destination is, and our client doesn't either. There will be housing, we don't know what that will look like, what that will feel like, where it will sit, but it's been shaped by a collective rather than an individual practice or an individual client, and that's hugely positive for us. And it all comes back to the word empathy, and it's about people.
Absolutely, and that sense that there really does seem to be a shift in approach. It feels like a very exciting time actually for architects and for their work in housing. Tom, picking up on that point there that Jennifer was talking about collaboration. I know that's something that you really were exploring in your presentation. Can you give some examples of your experience of collaboration, or any tips on best practice in that, making the most out of those collaborative relationships?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think actually the points we're talking about now and empathy are really relevant to that. And in terms of our design process, the way we try to begin a project and understand it is very much in a process of understanding the brief, the client, the site, everything we can, and the user and the history and everything we can get about a project, and draw that and think about it and marinate in it as long as we can. And then in that process allows the design to materialize. So not approaching it with a preconception or that kind of thought of, oh, it's my first idea and it's going to be great, and I'll just sort of like post-rationalize this into being. So that kind of process, giving it time, it feels really important, and being open to other stakeholders and what they need out of it, and what everyone needs out of it. And then the more the sort of envelope and the more it tightens, the easier the outcome often ends up being. And I think that's true for collaboration as well. So if you're approaching it and not being precious and coming at it with your own requirements, but allowing yourself to sort of let go of pride and accept what everyone else is kind of coming to the table with is really important. And I think that as a practice, what was really important for us is when we set up as there's three of us, and myself and Doug, my business partner, we've been working together for 10 years or longer. I can't actually remember how long, but it's that long that we've been designing together longer than we have apart. So that kind of letting go of what you really want to be, or accepting someone else had a better idea, is a really important part of design, and getting something at the end which is better than what you would have had at the start. We used to have an idea that we charge a really low fee for like a first idea design. So you just get the first idea, whatever it is like, really cheap, just whatever comes into our head, you get it, and it's like the cheapest way to do it. But that obviously is ridiculous, and we've never done it. But like the sort of the process, having time, and like everyone who wants to speak and needs to speak, being involved in that is really important, and not panicking and thinking you've got to design it by this evening, or even if you do accidentally design it by this evening, kind of allowing yourself to let go of it and come back to it. So that process feels really important to just really high quality like design. So empathy and understanding everyone else who's going to use it and be involved in it is critical, obviously. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that, the point you make there about that openness and that willingness to learn, I think really comes across in your presentations. In terms of opportunities then, opportunities for architects, Yẹmi, I wonder if you want to talk a little bit to that point. Where are you seeing sort of key trends and opportunities for lots of these brilliant architects in the room?
Yeah, so I think in terms of housing specifically, the housing market's absolutely buoyant at the moment, whether it be kind of homeowners wanting to relocate or kind of do up their homes to, fit with the new working from home arrangements, or kind of the really ambitious house building programs that we're seeing at the moment. So I also think even for smaller practices, and again, procurement, there's a general awareness that procurement needs to be more equitable. So there is now opportunities for kind of emerging practices as well as more diverse practices to really get their feet in and be part of the the housing market. So I think there's lots and lots of opportunities out there, but also comes with challenges hand in hand as well with that.
Thank you. And Chloe, I think just to hear from you on where you see those opportunities for practicing architects would be great to hear.
What do you mean, in London, or do you mean all over?
I'm just thinking sort of generally, really. I think, yeah, let's start with London, and then perhaps if there are other areas that you'd like to mention as well in terms of opportunities.
I mean, I think like just reflecting on some of the things Yẹmi was saying about public practice. I mean, I think the opportunities for architects have massively opened up like on a specific, what do I want to do as an architect wise over the last 10 years. I mean, because I remember coming out of university in 2005 and I'd quite like to work for the public sector. No idea how to, no idea who would be employing right now. And, at the time there wasn't really anybody, it wasn't really that many prospects for architects to get into the public sector. And that's changed, and it's I made the move before public practice was set up, but I think initiatives like public practice have massively opened kind of up the opportunity of people to be able to move into different professions. So I think there's huge opportunities on a career level that are massively different to what they were 10 years ago even. And I think in terms of, I think there's such a movement now in terms of house building in London and South East and beyond, which I think is starting to, I think it has gained momentum over the last 5 years in particular. And it seems like nearly every single London borough has got a development company or initiative or something about building 2,000, 10,000 new homes by 2030 or whatever it is. All the figures all seem very similar but slightly different. So I think there's huge opportunities out there, and I think the public sector is trying really hard, particularly in London. And we were talking about how Glasgow was slightly different with schools just before we kicked off, is trying to be able to make it open to newer practices to come into it. And I think that was one of the things we were really conscious of at Brick by Brick was because of the way it was set up, we could do direct appointments and use our own professional judgment to just give people commissions rather than have to kind of navigate from the other side of things to give. Now, however hard you think as an architect it is to apply to frameworks, it's really like on the other side, it's just as difficult to get the quality that you want in terms of who you're procuring. So I think that needs a bit of a continual shake-up, I think. Sorry, that was a bit of a rambling answer to everything.
No, it was excellent. Packed with info, thank you. And let's think as well, I think about the challenges in terms of housing at the moment and working creatively in this sector. Tom, I wonder whether you'd like to talk a little bit about that, where you're really seeing the challenges in housing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of challenges.
And how perhaps you're approaching them and overcoming those challenges.
Well, I was just thinking, I mean, there are quite boring challenges, which Chloe had on, not your slides was boring, but like the sort of more this kind of PI exclusions and the challenges that the whole industry is facing right now, which are mind blowing, which I won't go into, but that feels like a major challenge for the industry right now and needs to be addressed. There are more kind of I think we talked about modular, and I think one of the main issues we've come up against with modular is that it feels like it's an answer to a lot of problems. But there's a supply issue. You can't order enough, you can't build enough modules. There's the appetite, we think, amongst developers to use it, which is fantastic. But every kind of project that starts with it is under threat of not being built that way. It seems like there's lots of departure points for it, which tends to mean it doesn't end up being built that way. So I think that is a and also what we were talking about earlier about the issues of buyers being able to get mortgages to sort of buy modular homes. So there's lots of obstacles in the way of it, and but it still feels really important. It feels like certainly the Farmer Report was really clear about the need for MMC in the future of house building. So that for me feels like a sort of big challenge to overcome. And if we can, then it's a really exciting future. And I think that I'm not quite sure what the answer is there, but there's lots of problems that there hopefully will be solutions to.
Thank you so much. And Jennifer, I don't know whether you'd want to add to that, just in terms of your work as a practicing architect. Where do you see the challenges, and perhaps how have you overcome some of those?
I think that coming down from Glasgow today, I have to sort of start with obviously the climate emergency being the biggest challenge that we face across all sectors. I think that in Glasgow particularly, the new builds are the easy part. As architects, we can engage, get up to speed with new regulations and move through it. But the sort of existing buildings, existing housing stock, that's the biggest challenge. And as architects, it's the upskilling involved, the pace that we need to move at, to learn, to collaborate and to teach each other where we don't know the answers. I think so often as one of the biggest challenges, I was at a round table yesterday, and one of the biggest discussion points was about sharing what you don't know as well as what you do know. We're so good at sharing, we got this award, or look at this great project we finished, but what we need to start to share is, well, we made this building and this is the bit that we didn't know so much about or could have done better or learned this from. And so it's sharing, collaboration, I think will help us through that challenge. But coming from Glasgow, I just think about the tenements and all of the sort of retrofit projects that have to happen. There's some fantastic work being done by specialists in Glasgow, but that work in itself, it needs support at local and central government level. It's the cost of it. We know what we've got to do, but as architects, we can come up with the ideas and the solutions, but it's the financing of it as well. I could go on and on and on. I'll stop.
Well, certainly the climate crisis, I mean, it overarches everything at the moment, and is a massive challenge for all, but also seems to dovetail with that social sustainability as well. And I wonder, in terms of how you think housing can be more sustainable, both in terms of that environmental and social sustainability, and where they meet. Yẹmi, I wonder whether you'd like to talk about that a little.
Sure. I think there are many ways, but in regards to environmental sustainability, one of the things that I think we need to really focus on and push the narrative of is kind of reusing and refurbishing rather than demolition. I think there's a massive amount of work to be done there, and rebuilding as the first point of call. It's not always possible, but I think where we can, I think the first approach should be to adapt and reuse. In terms of social sustainability, I think especially looking at it from the client side, I think there's a big step needed to look beyond targets and numbers, because I think we mentioned a lot of it is about optimizing, maximizing, and in order for us to create places that people will want to live in, work in, play in, now and the future, I think it's creating spaces for a diverse needs of people. That will contribute to the kind of high quality of life, that it can only be achieved through a process of co-creation. And again, I think we've touched upon it a few different times here, but developing together rather than it being seen as it being the solution coming from the architect or from a given professional, but working with the stakeholders right at the beginning of the process to develop something together. And I think that also leads to when we when you talked about empathy, I think that's directly also linked to empowerment and trust. And a lot of the times when you're looking at massive regeneration projects, there's a big issue of trust there. And this feeling that, developing something that won't be for the existing community and that people will be displaced. So you're working really quite sensitively to start off with. But if you're able to build that trust from the beginning and it being something that you're doing together rather than something that's been done to people, I think that's quite empowering for communities. So I think in terms of social sustainability, those are the kind of things we really need to look at and push on.
Thank you. And Chloe, would you like to add to that point at all in terms of where environmental and social sustainability meet?
Yes, and I just wanted to kind of add to what Yemi was saying and tie what Jennifer was saying earlier as well about empathy is really important, but also being really believable is important as well. And I think that's where kind of the optimization and all of that sort of stuff comes in together. And it's really important when you are talking to people that you 100% know you can do what you say you're going to be doing, because then that leads to, if you can't do it or you can't deliver it, then it leads to kind of years of discussion and engagement that carries on and people start to lose trust. But yeah, in terms of integration of social and environmental sustainability, I think the two go hand in hand, really. I mean, I think that's what I was trying to talk about with One Planet Living, and I don't get paid by One Planet Living, but it's just a really useful framework. Like, fundamentally, if you're not building something that's for a local community or makes that community better, or not makes it better, but kind of it helps live them happier, healthier lives, that they're going to want to value that building and they should want to cherish it and keep it there for generations to come. If you can design the most sustainable building and put it somewhere, but if it's not, people don't buy into it, then it's not going to last the kind of the length of time that it should, and we'll be taking it down in another 50 years, which isn't what we should be doing.
Thank you so much. So very, very mindful of the time at the moment. It would be great to open up to questions from the floor. We've got some mics, so if people want to put their hand up, if they've got a question, we can get a mic over to you. We've got one here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, really great speeches. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Question I had is in regards to public engagement. We obviously know that there's the public consultation event during planning. So putting that aside, how else do you generally engage with the public to really get their thoughts on the development and their input?
So yeah, engagement with the public. Tom, or I would wonder whether you'd like to answer that first.
Yeah.
Your approach.
Yeah, it kind of varies, really. Depends on what. I mean, obviously, we don't just do housing, but all different sort of sectors. It really depends on the project and who's around and what we're trying to achieve out of it. But I mean, I was thinking of schemes we're doing, already mentioning before, about social sustainability and just sustainability as a wider subject that where we are doing kind of large interventions in a sort of townscape and which involves a lot of retrofit and new build, that we are using that, what I mentioned earlier about really kind of going into quite a lot of research and background in a project to understand it. That we then hold consultations that just really engage on that level. That this is what we found out about the project. This is what or the site and what we're trying to achieve out of it, before getting into the point of having any kind of proposals or massing or things that look scary and a kind of binary in the sense of like it exists now because we've drawn it. So going through a process that's actually kind of meaningful and has that sort of more, there's more of a question than an answer, and then allowing that to be part of that process of developing a concept is feels really important. But yeah, I mean, often if we can on the site that we're talking about, I think the last kind of couple of years have been quite difficult, a year and a half. And we found that consultations have had to move away from being, I mean, going back to being in person now, but when they were moving away from being an in-person event or opportunity to being something which is more online or somehow like a Zoom session or whatever it might be. But that in itself has been useful because not everyone wants to go to an event or wants to be sort of approached, and we would sometimes do them as one-to-one sessions, so go to someone's house and talk to them with models and drawings, and it's much more of a kind of less threatening engagement. But some people don't even want that. They do want to be able to kind of understand what they're looking at and engage with it without it being a kind of in-person encounter. So really that has been added to the sort of spectrum of how we can do it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think I would also say that the most successful kind of engagement with stakeholders that I've seen is something that isn't considered just a one-off event, and it starts right at the beginning, understanding what people think work, what don't work, and as you say, not necessarily just going there with something that is already ready-made, but really starting off from, we really need to know what to build here and how to build it. And that then being maybe a series of workshops as well, again, building trust, building this sense that the community are building it with you. So I think moving away from the idea that it's a consultation event, it's a process, I would say. So I think that's the most kind of successful kind of resident engagement kind of strategy that I've seen.
I think that I would echo that, and I would say that in Gov in Glasgow, we've taken a strategic partnership approach with the local authority, and so working with them in partnership, they've identified specific community groups that we should speak to, and so then we've reached out to them, and having the council acting as a bridge between our client and ourselves and the community has helped hugely. And I think it comes back to this, you mentioned the word trust. That's played a huge part in it. So I think it comes back to collaboration, partnership, and new ways of thinking about how we sort of go out into the community and being really proactive as architects. There's an opportunity for us to take a different type of role and cross lines effectively in terms of the traditional remit and role of an architect, whatever that is now.
Thank you, and thank you for that great question. Any other questions? Oh, we've got one here.
Hi, question for Chloe. You mentioned post-occupancy evaluation. Is that something that you as a practice have chosen to do, or is it now a requirement in terms of pitching to have a credible sort of post-occupancy process?
So I'd say both. So it's something that I am genuinely interested in and have been interested in for a while, but I do think increasingly so the industry is looking for you to know how your building has been functioning, and particularly I think the awards system is starting to change as well to say, we don't want you to just get your photo just as the paint's kind of been applied and yes, we'll give you an award after that, thank you very much, we want to know how it's functioning. But I guess a lot of that post-occupancy that is already happening, and it is still really difficult to get that data. It can be very techie, and it can be very, how is the air tightness on my building, and all of that sort of stuff. And I think actually what I'm interested in is how people feel about their home, like what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And so some of the interesting tidbits of information we got from, or Brick by Brick got from its resident survey was, how easy is it for you to clean your windows? And, actually that's really useful information to know that, we all do those diagrams in terms of what you can reach on the building regs, and actually people are saying that's not okay, I don't feel safe doing that. So you're like, well, okay, well we need to think about how we better design windows. So it's kind of all of, it's the user experience, but it's also the kind of how do people feel about the way that their homes are laid out, and asking really interesting questions. How do you feel about the height of your windowsill? Is your window too big? Do you feel exposed when your neighbours kind of walk past, or do you enjoy the light? And it's just kind of asking those sorts of questions. Am I doing it right? Because I think particularly when you're working on larger scale residential buildings, it's really easy to just kind of go, oh, I'd quite like a big kitchen here in that one. You don't really spend an awful lot of time thinking about the layout of people's homes sometimes. And so so it's kind of a bit of both.
Thank you. Another question?
Hi guys, thank you for the talk and for the presentation. My question is about when you're working on big developments or housing developments or with housing associations, as architects, how do you prioritize quality and value when you're working on design and build projects and over cost and over, over time? So how do you go about that?
How do you balance that equation? Who'd like to take that one?
I don't think you
Go
can
for it.
prioritize any over anything, really. It's kind of ultimately you're somebody who's providing a service to a client, and they've got an ambition for the project. And if it, you can push quality and you can make really savvy decisions. I think that's probably the way I would do it. Sorry, I'm thinking about my answer as I talk, but I think it's about, ultimately, our job is to get to a point where we've designed what we think is the best possible building for that client in that location for the budget that they wanted originally. So I think it's about spending that money wisely. So simple things that we were doing when I was at CGA were, let's just stack all the apartments. It makes it easier. It makes it easier to design. It makes it easier to build. And it means that we don't have to spend a whole load of money on steel that we don't necessarily need. So is there a clever way that we can think our way around this? And that means that we can afford the brick detailing on the facade. And so I think it's kind of decisions like that, really. I think it's very easy to kind of say, I want to do really good work and somebody should pay more money for this building. Ultimately, with prices going up all the time in terms of construction and supply, like, that's not our choice to make. And I think particularly with increased, and doing a more sustainable building does cost more. So we need to think about how that's practically managed as well.
Thank you. So I'm quite conscious of the time. But I think overall, what amazing presentations today. And I really just want to say thank you so much to our fabulous panel today, who've just been absolutely great. And to everybody for joining today and for being really part of such an inspiring discussion. So many good points there about the importance of a home, what it means about collaboration, about designing sustainably, both environmentally and socially. Just great points there, listening, learning, and also that importance of trust. So I think overall, thanks again hugely to VitrA for hosting us today in this wonderful showroom and for making this event possible. There's a chance now to have a drink and catch up with friends and colleagues. So please do. We've got a bit of time to stop and chat, and I think it would be lovely to do so. So once again, thank you for joining and have a lovely evening.